What's going on, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be discussing every siren in the history of Borderlands that we know so far. I'm going to be going over every character that we know who is or was a siren, as well as what their powers were, along with a brief history of their character, mainly if it's relevant to the topic of sirens. Now, even to this day, the sirens' purpose and origin all remain a mystery. We don't know where they came from, why they exist, or what their purpose is to serve. What we do know is that there are apparently 7 sirens in existence at any given moment. Only women are eligible to inherit the powers, except under very unique circumstances. And you can tell a siren by the tattoos that appear along their left arm and body, which show up once they've inherited the powers. While commonalities such as these are all shared across each siren, individually they have their own special power, 5 of which we are aware of. I'll split this video into segments by what character had what power, so I won't be jumping all over the place. But first, we should establish what each of their powers have in common. There seems to be set abilities that every siren is capable of. One of the most visual, but not often used, are their wings. A siren, when they activate their powers, blooms wings behind them. We've seen this with Lilith, Tannis, and Angel. Amara has a design which resembles wings, but we've yet to see actual wings from her. Sirens have shown the ability to fly with their wings, though it's something they don't do very often. Another ability sirens seem to share is telepathy. They are able to enter the minds of someone and communicate with them from a great distance. I'm not too sure how it works because Lilith, for example, began communicating with Zane, Amara, Mose, and Flack before she ever met them. They agreed to join the Crimson Raiders and Marcus picked them up, but somehow Lilith was able to mentally communicate with them just like that. Tannis and Angel have shown this ability as well to do the same, so I wouldn't see why the other sirens couldn't communicate via telepathy as well, so long as they put in the practice. This other ability I feel I can only describe as siren energy. It might sound weird. Of course all sirens have siren energy, but up until Borderlands 3, we'd never really seen sirens do much outside of their core ability. But in Borderlands 3, when Lilith and Tyreen are fighting, we see not either of their siren powers being used, but they're blasting each other with energy beams. They both have this default power that they're using on each other, and it extends even past this moment as well. Tyreen also exhibits a force push. I don't know where this comes from, and it certainly doesn't seem like an ability that would be solely tied to her and her powers. It's kind of weird, to be honest. But we can only imagine that there is a set of siren abilities that all of them can use, these offensive attacks being some of them. Every siren also seems to be connected via their memories. A siren can know of others from the past without any knowledge about them whatsoever. This has only been vaguely touched upon, but it has been established that sirens can be aware of those who came before them, no matter how long ago. But no one we know has mastered this technique. Another side note about the powers is that they're ever evolving. I don't believe the core of what the power is will ever change based on the time gap between some of these sirens, but what one is capable of with these powers may add new, smaller quirks over time in addition to their power. Something else sirens can do is imbue their memories and thoughts into objects. Most of the time they are very eventful or traumatic milestones in someone's life, but that may be due to a lack of mastery. The older and wiser a siren is with their power, imprinting thoughts into an object may be more of a skill, not reliant on highly emotional moments that accidentally do it. Sirens also have some kind of connection to iridium. Their correlation is still unknown, but for whatever reason, this element is like a steroid to them. They can absorb it into their bodies and their powers become vastly more powerful. On it, they can regenerate their bodies at superhuman speed. But with such power comes real danger. Iridium is highly addictive to sirens if used too much, and over-reliance on it can be detrimental to one's natural existence as their bodies become dependent, lest risk death. And finally, the last thing all sirens have in common is their free will. As we learned in the Director's Cut DLC for Borderlands 3, a guardian known as the Seer was effectively responsible for the game's entire plot. It wanted Pandora to be opened, it wanted the Destroyer to be free, but it also wanted the Sirens dead. The reason for its grudge and motivation are unknown. But the Seer had to manipulate and control a bunch of humans that surrounded the characters in the story in order to get its outcome because it couldn't influence the Sirens who were leads in both factions. According to the Seer, they are unpredictable, they cannot be swayed in their decisions, and they don't know what their next actions are going to be. To this extent, Sirens appear to have true free will to shape the course of history for the better or for the worse. Anyway, I suppose we should finally get to the actual Sirens themselves. So let's start with the oldest Siren we are aware of, Nyriad. While no images of what she looked like currently exist, her power was the currently nicknamed Phaseleech. As the name would imply, she was able to absorb the life force and energy of living creatures to use for herself. By absorbing living organisms, she could become much stronger than she naturally was. But she could also divert this energy outwards if she wanted, acting as a sort of conduit. The latter example is the most relevant to her character as she lived alongside the Iridian species, the ancient alien race whose technology practically scatters the entire universe and that which most things seem to revolve around. In modern day, they are extinct, but that's solely thanks to Nyriad. The Iridians had discovered the Destroyer and saw it the ultimate threat to existence. If left unchecked, it would destroy everything. So they made a cage to stop it, Pandora. But with such a powerful, potentially immortal monster, it wasn't as simple as stuffing it under some rock. The Iridians' cage needed lives, sacrifices to help strengthen the bond that would chain down the Destroyer so it could never move once trapped. And this is where Nyriad comes in. She was sought out for her power directly, where she witnessed and learned all about the Iridian civilization and people. She ultimately agreed to help them with their plan, and the entire Iridian species were used as bait to lure in the Destroyer towards Pandora. Once the Destroyer was close enough, Nyriad leeched the entire Iridian species as requested and used their power to lock the Destroyer in Pandora. She was mystified by everything, and while their plan had worked, she wound up having a strong sense of survivor's guilt. While it never quite felt like her responsibility to stop the Destroyer like the Iridians, she did just single-handedly wipe out an entire race of people. A powerful one at that. She saw her powers as dangerous, too dangerous to just allow existing. So she tried to stop her powers from passing on to another host. She took a gamble and locked herself in a vault where she would spend out the rest of her days until she died. Her gamble paid off as after her death, they didn't find a new host, instead staying trapped inside her vault for many, many years. That is, until someone opened her vault. In a more modern era of history where knowledge of the Iridians have since long faded and megacorporations have come in and taken over, Typhon de Leon, the very first Vault Hunter, has since established his reputation and gone on many journeys of his own. He met a former Atlas researcher named Leda Calypso, and the two fell madly in love. She was extremely interested in the Iridian history and wanted to learn more about it, so she and Typhon set out on their own journey to uncover the fabled homeworld of Necrotafeo. Needless to say, they eventually came across the planet and began exploring it, where they uncovered its vault, Nyriad's vault. When they opened it, a giant serpent emerged, which Typhon promptly killed, and as a celebratory act, they had sex inside the vault and conceived children. Leda became pregnant with twins, one boy and one girl. Their names would be Troy and Tyreen Calypso. Tyreen inherited Nyriad's leech power. However, in an insanely rare circumstance, Troy did as well only because he and his sister were conjoined twins. Troy was attached to Tyreen via his arm. He was the lesser developed sibling, always leeching sustenance off of his sister. So when she became a siren, part of that power also went to him, only in a technical sense, making him the first male siren. Eventually, they were separated, though since the siren's power never belonged to him, he was always dying. But the powers allowed him to leech Tyreen to continuously stay alive. He was the true essence of a parasite. Tyreen also accidentally, at an early age, leeched their mother and killed her. By all stretches, it seems to have been a genuine accident. Typhon was very aware of what they were and tried to keep them best hidden from the world. However, as they grew up, it only made them feel caged and they wanted to break free. They eventually did so, and that's when they went to Pandora and formed the Children of the Vault. Tyreen, and by proxy Troy, used their powers to showcase themselves as gods who wanted to open the Great Vault, which is of course Pandora, so she could leech the Destroyer and become a god. But to do this, she had to charge Pandora's vault key, which was the moon Elpis. But she didn't have the strength for that yet, so she figured she would leech a ton of smaller vault monsters until she had the strength to charge Elpis. Of course, being in Borderlands 3, the Crimson Raiders would stand in her way, most notably Lilith. The two of them would eventually clash, with Tyreen emerging the victor. But instead of killing Lilith, she chose to play with her food and instead absorbed her powers while leaving her alive. That makes Tyreen one of the only sirens we know to have been in possession of multiple siren powers at once. In fact, the leech seems to be the only siren able to theoretically hold every siren power possible in a single host. I don't want to say it's impossible for the others. We don't know if one siren can choose another siren as the inheritor of their powers upon death or what. The leech is just very dangerous in this sense because in the wrong hands, they can become a menace. Anyway, with Lilith's powers, Tyreen would largely use it to teleport herself and others from location to location. All the while, she leeched as many people as possible trying to open Pandora. Inevitably, by the end of Borderlands 3, she does release the Destroyer and leech it, becoming the god she's always wanted to be, but while she absorbed an unkillable god, she herself is killable, making the hybrid between them killable. The Vault Hunters of the game defeat her, and her Siren leech powers, presumably, go out to find a random host. I don't think she knew how to choose a successor, nor who it would be if she knew how anyway. Either way, the leech is one of the most dangerous siren abilities to have in existence. As for Troy, I'll get to him later. Our next siren is Lilith, who is the only one we know to have been in possession of the Phasewalk. While her character has built up a persona around her Firehawk gimmick, lest we forget that's not her actual siren power. Phasewalking, to the limited knowledge we know about it, allows Lilith to send her body to another dimension across space and time. She technically remains where she is when she does so and can move around the area, but in this state, she's nearly invincible. Her body doesn't just go invisible, nor does it just disappear. It has to go somewhere. Whatever is happening to her in this state affects everything around her, particularly when it comes to elements. Fire is of course her strongest elemental connection. Lilith, I think, is also one of the few sirens we've seen that has actually evolved as time has gone on. In the first Borderlands game, she was strictly limited to walking, but in Borderlands 2, she gains the ability to teleport, going from one location to the other in the blink of an eye. During multiple occasions, she grabs other characters and pulls them to a new location. At first, it might have been sloppy, but as time has gone on, she's become incredibly comfortable with it. This might have been the result of her iridium addiction, which enhanced her powers, but nevertheless, I believe her phasewalking evolved in this game. Borderlands 3, I would say, does and doesn't have an evolution in Lilith's capabilities. To be fair, Lilith doesn't actually have siren powers for most of the game. As talked about, Tyreen, using her leeching siren power, steals Lilith's own and begins using it herself. Tyreen would go on to use the phase-walking ability in many of the similar veins Lilith had before, mostly teleporting themselves and groups of enemies to locations. Outside of that, Tyreen doesn't seem to do much with Lilith's power at all. However, I think it brings up an interesting point in regards to Siren powers because Tyreen is able to teleport with it. If that ability truly was an evolution in her Siren powers, it functions much like a permanent unlock, so Tyreen wasn't set back and limited to normal phase walking. She had all of the powers Lilith had access to because Lilith evolved them. At the end of the game, when Tyreen is killed, the power returns to Lilith as she is still alive. Lilith does fly, which she's never done before, so that could also be seen as an evolution of her power, but Tannis also flies earlier in the game as well. Most Sirens' power do come with wings, or at the very least imagery that resembles wings. It's just that we've never really seen Sirens fly before 3, but maybe they were always capable of it. Anyway, the last thing Lilith uses her powers for is phase walking straight into Eldest to prevent it from crashing down onto the surface and destroying the planet. As things stand, it appears Lilith has gotten herself stuck in the other dimension her body travels to while phase walking. She's in a state of limbo, not easily found, but she's alive and her body is somewhere. Amara is another character who is the sole claimant of her power Phasetrance. Her Siren ability can be seen as one of the most developed powers that any of the Sirens possess. Continuing on the topic of Siren powers evolving, there is a vast array of different uses Amara can use her powers for. Firstly, Phasetrance allows her to manifest human features in a transparent aura-like projection. Being a hand-to-hand fighter, she largely manifests arms and fists to deliver stronger, more devastating blows. She's actually shown the capacity to summon a total of 6 arms at once. Not all of them are used for offense. Her projections are able to defend her from oncoming attacks, and she can summon a single arm to restrain a target in place. While arms seem to be her main wheelhouse, as said, it is any part of the human body, including the entire body. One of Amara's abilities is being able to send out an astral projection to ram against her targets. As you can tell, Amara can do a lot. As a trade-off, she's one of the few Sirens whose imagery doesn't come with wings, so she's likely unable to fly, at least for now. We don't know if her entire wheelhouse of abilities came from generations of Siren evolution, or if she personally trained so hard she unlocked all of these things by herself. Both seem viable. Angel is the daughter of the series' infamous antagonist, Handsome Jack. Angel's inheritance of the Phaseshift ability seems to have been that of the universe's random selection process. She got it out of the blue on a perfectly normal day when she was still a little child. Phaseshift is the ability to manipulate technology to the Sirens' command. She can effectively communicate and control any machine to her desire, regardless of how little she knows about it. If it's technology, it may as well be a child's toy in this Sirens' hand. In fact, as a child, she practically mastered it by complete accident. Unfortunately for Angel, most of her life with this power was used by her father. When Angel accidentally killed her mother by phase-shifting a machine gun, Jack locked her inside of a chamber and hooked her up to the Hyperion network where he was working, where he would use her to assist in his rise to power. She had access to the satellites, could observe and communicate with any echo recorder on her frequency, and she did. Throughout all of Jack's rise, she was there assisting him in his goals because she was being manipulated. Regardless of her confined state, her powers came natural to her, and not just her phase shifting, but her telepathy as well. She was able to telepathically communicate with the Vault Hunters in Borderlands 1 and guide them on their mission. Even when the Echo Net got brought down, she could still talk to them, but she lost her eyes in the sky. Either way, using the satellite, she was able to monitor them, and using her telepathy, she was able to talk to them. After the events of Borderlands 1, when Iridium broke its way through to the surface of the planet, Angel was used as a catalyst to charge the planet's vault key, as it goes on a 200-year cooldown. By pumping her system full of Iridium and supercharging her Siren powers, Jack was able to shorten the time span on the use of the planet's vault key. But as a result, Angel's life became dependent on the iridium supply. Her body had been supplied for so long and by so much that it got used to the supercharged state that it was always in, so unhooking her would kill her. And of course, during the events of Borderlands 2, she switches sides to our main characters where she has them kill her by destroying the machine she's been hooked up to for most of her life. After her death, Angel's powers did in fact wind up finding a new host in Patricia Tannis. Now it's a mystery as to why Tannis was the successor to these powers. The games have yet to indicate that Angel had chosen Tannis to be the inheritor, or if it was by complete chance. I find the latter hard to believe because of all of the billions of life forms that exist in the universe. The chance of it just so happening to pick one of the characters already relevant to the story on the same planet where everything is taking place seems like an insurmountable coincidence. So mystery currently stands on why Tannis was the successor, but that doesn't negate the fact that she was. Tannis was actually very clever upon becoming a Siren. Having interacted with Lilith, Maya, and being knowledgeable about Angel, she was more than aware of what she just became. So understanding the potential risk involved with being a rarity, she hid it. She covered up her tattoos and never used her powers in the public's eye. She did confide this secret to Lilith, and she helped her in any way that she could. Tannis trained and worked on mastering her powers in an underground doll mining facility where she would gain more than a decent grasp on her powers over technology. Her secret was well hidden for many years until she was captured by the Calypso twins and handed over to Pain and Terror. Before she was killed on their broadcast for the entertainment of their audience, Tannis was forced to reveal her siren nature to everyone as she destroyed the machine which threatened her life. Similar to Lilith, she too has the ability to fly with her siren wings. After this, she spends the majority of her time charging up the various vault keys that were brought to her, as they are technology and she can, in essence, vaguely understand them as if they were talking. And she's also the one who attempts to reactivate the machine. The machine is the device that Nyriad used to seal the destroyer away, but now since Tyreen has began reopening the cage using the moon, their best effort was to try and reuse the device once more. The machine is only functional via a Siren's touch, which she is, and due to it being a type of technology, Tannis is able to understand how to use it as all the immense energy courses through her body while she functions as its conduit. Unfortunately, this plan fails when Tyreen comes in and destroys the piece that they're using, resulting in the destroyer breaking free. But for now, that's about as far as Tannis' Siren usage goes. Our next main Siren is none other than Maya, who is in possession of the Phaselock. This ability is largely used to hold a singular target in place using a sphere of blue energy. Similar to Lilith, there is another dimension in play which prevents her targets from moving. It's actually within that dimension they're being trapped in. Amara's may be more of a brute force hold, while Maya's is more technical. However, Maya seems to be limited by the size of her targets. The larger the enemy, the less likely she is to be able to Phaselock it. This doesn't seem to be a weakness in the power of the Siren's ability, rather Maya's own inexperience or lack of power at the time. Like Lilith's, her powers have a strong connection to elements for whatever reason. But possibly one of the most interesting things about Maya's power is her ability to brainwash people. Her ability, aptly named Thoughtlock, allows her to grab hold deeper than just their body and into their mind and how they function. She forces them to switch allegiances and turn on their allies, but only really did this while fighting. This is what I think makes Phaselock much more powerful than Amara's Phase Grasp, because there's something more to it, making it much more complicated. Maya never exhibited this ability in Borderlands 3, but that doesn't mean it can't be used again. As far as her story goes, she was recognized as a Siren when she was still a baby and brought to Athenas, where she was raised and trained by the monks there. However, by the time Maya was there, Athenas had become corrupted by greedy monks seeking power and money. The planet was still a Siren hub world, and they did know what they were talking about, just some of them were corrupt now. So Maya grew up training her powers on a very short leash where she longed for adventure and excitement. When she was eventually old enough to recognize what some of these monks were doing, she executed her handler and went to Pandora to find out more about sirens. This would of course be where Borderlands 2 happens, and she doesn't really learn anything. She more so meets Lilith and makes a ton of acquaintances with the rest of the Crimson Raiders, but she didn't gain much knowledge about sirens. So after Borderlands 2, she returned to Athenas to serve as the planet's protector and clean up the place. She did learn a lot more upon her return and taking her siren studies more seriously, one of the most important being the tradition of passing on one's siren powers. This is relevant because she met a young orphan stowaway named Ava. Maya saw a lot of herself in Ava, particularly in her reckless and at the same time adventurous spirit. Maya was willing to help guide this lost girl the best she could to give her purpose and meaning to her life. She believed in her capacity to live up to the task, and so Ava became Maya's apprentice and began practicing all of the techniques she had learned and would one day pass down. But before we can get to Ava, Maya's phase locking ability did wind up in a different host with Troy Calypso. As mentioned in Tyreen's segment, being a leech himself, Troy too was in possession of a sliver of his sister's power, so he too was able to leech. And in Borderlands 3, Troy leeches Maya and kills her. Instead of finding a new host as the power is supposed to, the unique nature in which one siren, specifically the leech, kills another and absorbs them, prevented the Phaselock ability to find a successor. Instead, it was stolen by Troy. This rejuvenated his withering lifespan as he was no longer dependent on his sister. The new siren power was sustaining him, so he was now free. With it, he began conducting his own experiments at the Anvil prison site. With the power, he was able to use it to infuse several prisoners with iridium and traces of his own phase locking ability to mutate them. These new super soldiers were known as the Anointed. Surprisingly, and I can't really explain why, the Anointed enemies are able to phase walk like Lilith. You'd expect them to bear a similar ability to Maya since it was her power, but for whatever reason they're able to, on a small scale, replicate Lilith's siren power. The main thing Troy would do with his power is attempt to charge Elpis, the moon of Pandora, as it's the planet's vault key. He's able to phase lock the moon and begin charging it, but only thanks to being hopped up on iridium like Angel was. Maya never really used iridium to supercharge her powers, so she never phase locked such a large object. But Troy's ability to do so is once again thanks to his leech powers. The leech is able to absorb as much iridium as they want without suffering any of the negative side effects that come with it thanks to their power. So Troy was able to supercharge his phase lock without any risk to himself. But his plans get interrupted when the Vault Hunters destroy his iridium supply, so then he starts leeching power off of Tyreen to finish the job. He gets so carried away with his power that he actually almost kills her. However, he is stopped and killed. The powers are then officially allowed to follow the true previous Siren's will and make their way to Ava, who uses the power to protect the others. Outside of this moment, Ava doesn't get too much of a chance to utilize her powers in any way. That is to say, the story doesn't do anything with her after this moment. Her powers seem to identically resemble Maya's, and that makes sense since she learned everything from her. This next group of sirens fall into the category of unknown. We know that they were sirens, but we don't know what powers they actually possessed. First was the ruler of Athenas, Queen Dido. While we never see her, she's a character who exists in the Typhon logs in Borderlands 3. Her appearance is detailed towards the end of her life, meaning she's described as having long gray hair, she was thin with bony fingers. At some point in the past, Athenas became a hub world dedicated to the history and study of sirens. Queen Dido ruled the planet as its siren about a generation or two before all of the games. Yet again, returning to this story is Typhon de Leon, the first Vault Hunter. During one of his many travels, he came to Athenis to see its vault. This, however, was outlawed under her rule, and he was captured and set to be executed. As a final request, he asked for a dance, for which Dido, for whatever reason, makes a move, grabs his butt, and kisses him. She and Typhon were boyfriend and girlfriend for the remaining 4 years of her life before she passed away of old age. Personally, I think the most logical power for her to have been in possession of was the Phaselock, same as Maya and Ava. That this one power has successfully been passed down via the successor ritual for some time on this planet. To add on to this, Typhon also during his story describes having been caught by Queen Dido. How does one relatively young and spry Vault Hunter get caught by an elderly woman with only 4 years left to live? So while not confirmed, I think it's a safe assumption to think Dido had the Phaselock. The other main Siren whose powers we don't know was Commandant Steele. She was in charge of the Crimson Lance forces sent to Pandora during the events of Borderlands 1, so quite a bit in the past before anyone had really uncovered anything regarding Iridians or Sirens. Unfortunately, there's practically zero information in regards to Steele's power at all. As far as we're aware, she's never activated them, or had the chance to, at least on screen, and none of what anyone else has seems like it could have lined up with any of the other characters during the timeline, meaning she couldn't have had Amara's Phasetrance because Amara has had it since she was a kid. So after Steele's death, none of the other powers make sense to have gone to any of these other characters. So Steele was likely in possession of the 6th Siren power we are currently unaware of. As stated, Steele did die at the end of Borderlands 1, so unable to pick a successor, her powers likely entered the universe and selected some random woman as its inheritor. Coming in from the comic series of Borderlands story is Asha. She is currently a non-canon Siren as the games do not acknowledge the comic books' lore and story. That can of course change, and I think it'd be neat to see some kind of reference to Asha, but perhaps a reference or nod is what she'd remain best as. That's not to say she's not cool, quite the opposite actually. Her Siren power, while unnamed, allows her the ability to control animals. Like Tannis' universal technology reach, Asha can bend the will of any animal around to obey her command. But like most balanced powers, she's limited to smaller sized species. For example, while fighting a rak hive, she takes control of the raks instead of the giant hive itself. But as we've learned as the story had developed, her strength to control larger animals would have likely increased with the consumption of iridium. A little bit may have given her the boosted strength to control the size of something like the rak hive, or even a dangerous, life-threatening amount could have potentially even momentarily controlled a vault monster. I mean, everything, including humans, are technically animals, but something as godly as a vault monster must come at a heavy burden. She's also the only Siren not to have a set of tattoos along her arm or visible at any point. Either way, we never get to see it because the comic series never had a chance to wrap up, and Asha has never been mentioned or alluded to in the games, making it unlikely that her animal controlling Siren power is one of the 2 missing unknown Siren abilities. But then again, I could be wrong. The one simply referred to as the Eldest is another Siren which hails from the comic series. While also not a canon character to the game's story, her role is pretty small and we don't get much time with her anyway. Her purpose in the comic seems to have been to pass down her powers to Lilith when she was a little girl. Shortly after her father's death, the Eldest appears, informing her that she is a Siren and has great power within her. She dies shortly after, and logic would presume Lilith obtained her Siren markings then. However, considering the whole Siren idea wasn't a fully developed concept when the comic was made, the Eldest also doesn't seem to have exhibited powers that we already know. By that, I mean it's likely that one of the initial ideas for how Siren powers worked was that they were unique to the person who had them, not necessarily a preset power that moves around. So the Eldest doesn't seem like she was in possession of the Phasewalk, though that can be debated. How such an elderly woman can travel a great distance in her condition can be explained via phasewalking. But the more upfront detail about the Eldest seemed to be her future telling. She knew Lilith had great power the moment she was born. She warns Lilith about the other sirens she will cross paths with on her journey, and so on. Future telling so far hasn't been a siren staple, so she may have had the ability to see into the future, but also phasewalking is still on the table. Like I said, her story isn't canon, so unless the games say otherwise, this isn't Lilith's actual backstory. So as things currently stand now, 3 powers are out in the wild: Tyreen's Phaseleech and Commandant Steele's mystery power. The 7th siren is also a mystery, but her character and power seems much bigger than the other ones. But nevertheless, what she is capable of as a siren is also a mystery. As you can tell, there are still tons of question marks regarding them. Even despite how long this video was, I'm sure there was tons of other smaller things about sirens that slipped my mind and I accidentally left out. So if there's any other lore about sirens that I missed, leave a comment below so we can continue expanding upon everything we know. But for now, that's all I have to say for this topic. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next Borderlands video.